This course is presented to you free of charge by TTJ Tech Services of www.ttjtech.biz and by Stir It Up of www.stiritup.com. And remember, stir is spelled with a U, not an I, so that's STURITUP.com. TTJ Tech Services and Stir It Up are pleased to offer this course to you, to the glory of God, and to the benefit of all those who listen.
Welcome to More with the Mac 2024. This course is a little late this year. Had some personal stuff to take care of, but now we're going to kick it off. This session is going to be a sit down with my buddy John Panarese over at Mac4theblind.com and ttj.biz Mac Bridge. We're going to talk about the comparisons to Mac and Windows, VoiceOver, JAWS, and NVDA. It ain't a Windows bashing session. It ain't saying one's better than the other. We're just going to talk about the myths and theories that people have out there and try to put them to rest. You know, if you have to use Windows or you like to use Windows, that's up to you. If you like to use Mac, you like to use Mac, or want to use a Mac, that's up to you. But we want to put to bed the theories that one's better than the other, or one can do this and one can do that, so you should use this one. It's not about that. After that, going forward, next sessions will be demonstrations, teaching you how to use the apps, Mail, Messages, Safari, how to install apps, how to organize your apps, how to manage your folders and your dock. Predictable patterns by my buddy Matt over at ttj.biz. He does a lot better jobs than I do. So the episodes will go up every Monday at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central. And if there's something you want discussed, if you want something demoed, then send us an email at support@stiritup.com. That's STURITUP.com. Otherwise, it's going to be the same basic demonstrations showing you how to do things that we just discussed. And all I can say now is enjoy the course, and thanks for joining us. This is Trainer Cliff. I'm here with my buddy John Panarese and Trainer Matt. And John Panarese from Mac for the Blind. Y'all should know who he is by now. Anyway, I have an upcoming series called More with the Mac. This will be our third year. The first year was actually called Month with the Mac, but since the Mac can do more than any other operating system that shall be nameless, I called it More with the Mac. But before we get into that course, we want to discuss the comparisons, not Windows versus Mac, not Mac versus Windows, not JAWS versus VoiceOver. We want to point out benefits of each operating system for each individual case per se. So bottom line is, as we always say over at TTJ and Stir It Up, and I'm pretty sure John says it too, it's personal preference. Mm-hmm. You know, take what fits you the best. So John, why don't you start us off, because you have the most experience on working with both, because you've taught both, you've worked with both, you've sold both. So why don't you jump right in here and get us started?
Well, I think, the point is that this, people are going to be tempted to still believe that this is like a Mac versus Windows thing. And I'm over that. I used to get involved in those frays. And I think both operating systems and screen readers are at a point in which they are pretty much equal in terms of, you can't turn around and say like years ago, you can't do this with the Mac, you can't do Braille, you can't do Microsoft Office, blah, blah, blah. So I'm speaking strictly from the perspective of someone who has trained clients over the last 13 years in both operating systems, multiple screen readers for Windows, going back to Slimware Window Bridge, and had sold and supported Windows products way back as far as 1993. So as a trainer, and again, this is my point of view from working with real people, the Mac to me is a much more advantageous platform for us, whether you're a new person completely unaware of how screen readers and computers work, or you are coming over from any level of experience from Windows. VoiceOver itself is not as overly cumbersome and richly layered in the same way that JAWS has become. I often joke when a new version of JAWS comes out that the next version is going to have something in the release notes that says, if you want to make a cup of coffee, do this layered command, because it just seems as though they're trying to make the screen reader do everything. I think the one thing that Apple has focused on is just making VoiceOver work as a screen reader. They may not have what some people consider to be all of the bells and whistles that, JAWS has, the revise it, whatever it's called, the, all of the layered commands that you can do. But VoiceOver is intuitive. It does not require like as much memorization. Now, keep in mind a screen reader as a keyboard driven system is going to require memorization. I'm not, sidestepping that reality. I'm saying by way of having taught people, it's a much easier process to teach them to use the Mac over Windows. I think what does happen to some Windows people is they've become so entrenched and used to the way that Windows works that when they get to using a Mac, it's such a different and foreign experience for them that they immediately toss it aside, that it's too difficult, or you can't do this, you can't do that. And I jokingly will say, I think that some of us who have used Windows for umpteen years psychologically have made ourselves forget how difficult the struggle was to really come to terms with using Windows effectively. It wasn't an overnight success story, at least certainly not for me and for many people that I've taught. In fact, I have users that I've worked with years ago who still contact me with questions once in a while because they just can't figure things out. And it's not to say that, the Mac is this overnight, Rome is built in a day solution, because it's not. Everything requires a process. You have to learn to crawl before you can walk, and walk before you can run. I just find that, to kind of summarize, the path as of teaching and learning a Mac is much easier and straightforward and does not have the bends and curves and hairpin turns that trying to teach and navigate a Windows client through to get them to an equal, point in the road, so to speak, as a Mac client.
Very well said. And, it comes back to what your preference is, and people who have been using Windows and JAWS or NVDA for years are at this conclusion that it's the best thing and there's nothing else that matters. Now, Matt, you have worked with Windows and Mac limitedly over the last few years, but you still do it. But you and your mom used to do things with the PCs and stuff. Tell us what brought you over to the Apple Mac world, and why you haven't gone back.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's so good to be here with both of you. And yeah, it is true. I was a PC user first, a Windows user. My experience was what I think many people had, and probably to some extent still have, which is that, I was sort of pushed into by different groups, and I won't get into who they are because I'm not in the business of trying to disparage people, nor do I think anybody did anything malicious on purpose. But, by certain groups of people, I was pushed into the use of Windows and JAWS. I was never really a huge fan of JAWS, and kind of for the same reasons that you were saying, John. when the tutorial system for a screen reader is literally hours and hours long, when there are different command sets for almost every app, this just didn't make sense to me. And so, from the get-go, I wasn't thrilled, but it was all we had. You were told this is the best way you can do it, or the only way you can do it. And so, for a lot of years, I just dealt with that, and you heard things about the Macintosh, and you just believed them, and you just kind of accepted the narrative. And then, as time went on, again, there were things with Windows, and again, it's not a goal to go into a direct, Windows versus Mac. Obviously, I prefer the Mac. I would be lying if I said I didn't, because otherwise I wouldn't use it, So there were some things right away, that I would hear people say about the Mac, like, oh, I don't have to do disk defragmenting, and I don't have to deal with, DLL files, and I don't have to deal with the registry and all these other things. And, I haven't restarted my Mac in a month, it just works. And I'm thinking, man, that's different than the experience that I have, And so I finally had the opportunity to get a Mac for a job that I was doing. And when I did, I used it for probably a day and a half to 2 days, and said, this is what I want to be doing. And, for me, it was a very deliberate decision. I said, I want to give this Mac a chance to become the computer that I used. I already went into it with the attitude that I'm going to like this, that I'm going to enjoy it, and that I really want something different, without getting into too much of that. It just, it was really where I was at that point. And so what I decided to do was, I had a Windows laptop and a Windows PC. I actually sold the Windows PC, and I put the Windows laptop in the far back corner of a drawer, because I said, I'm not going to allow myself to rely on this. I'm going to give it a couple weeks, maybe a month, where I don't touch this laptop, and I don't use it as a fallback. I don't say, well, okay, I can't figure this out on the Mac, so I'll just pull out the PC and do it. No, I'm gonna force myself to use the Mac in everything, and see where that gets me.
So
and
at
that time,
you never reverted back to a PC once you went to when you started using the Apple world ecosystem, as we call it, and had a Mac on your desk. You never said, I'm going to keep this PC for a backup. Safari doesn't work for me, so let me jump over to Internet Explorer at the time. That's nothing that you never did.
I never did it. The next time I pulled that PC out of the drawer was to send it to someone else who purchased it. That was literally it.
And that's the only way you can learn too. I always tell my clients the story of my adventure where and people think it's funny, but it actually really isn't. I unplugged my PC, and at the time, my desk, the way it was set up with the spaghetti wires of all the different things that were connected to the PC, the scanner, etc., to go under that desk and try to figure out what the power supply plug would have been a contortionist's act. So when I unplugged my PC, that was it. I had to use a Mac unless I wanted to kill myself trying to plug it in again.
Well, yeah,
I was going to comment on that too, Matt, because I've been using a Mac. I can call myself a true vet now, because it's been almost 13 years, maybe closer to 12. But when I first got my first iMac for Father's Day back in 2010 or 11, I think it was. The big heavy one that had the bulky back, and you had to carry it with two hands walking out the door.
Yeah.
But before I did that though, I sold every PC, even my wife's PC. I made her get rid of her PC because I didn't want to fall back into, this is frustrating, this ain't what I thought it was, so let me go back over to PC. I went cold turkey on everything for 6 months. Now, I'm not saying I was an expert, but I had, to drill down and learn it. Be patient. Make sure I wasn't, gonna say this isn't for. I wanted to make sure it was for me, because there wasn't lists back then. There wasn't, I mean, there was a user guide built in, but there was people who sold books that said, okay, this is how you do this, that, and the other. You know, the natural Braille press, I think it is, John.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
they sold a book back then. I didn't buy it for the Mac, but I did buy it for the phone, because when my phone was actually my first Apple device, my iPhone, I think it was 4. It was the one right before Siri, so yeah, it was the 4. But
Yeah. Yep.
But with the Mac, I did not want, when people were talking about the phone, I said, well, if they're this good with the phone, and I experienced the phone, I said, well, let me try the Mac then. And it, I haven't went, they say once you go Mac, you never go back. That's what I say anyway. So, I have to work with the PC on a daily basis, because that's where my work requires. But as soon as I get off work or on my off days, I'm not touching that PC. I'm on my Mac or my phone doing things. So I don't want people to think that this is a Windows bashing contest, because it's not. I use Windows every day, and they have gotten better at a lot of things, but Mac is still my preferred computer.
Yeah, and into fairness, again, this is just from teaching and working with people. Yeah, absolutely. Windows 11 is not bad, and JAWS does what it needs to do. And there are situations in which the client has no choice. They have to use Windows because it's what work requires, et cetera, like Cliff. But, again, I always try to emphasize to people that, just because you're forced to use something in a certain environment doesn't mean it has to be your only choice. And that's the beauty of the fact that as blind people in 2024, we have options. We're not limited to just a Windows show. And to me, that's the point that sometimes people miss. And I have no problem encouraging my clients to know both, because I think as a blind person, having both skill set, especially if you're going out into the work world, is beneficial. And if I had to, like Cliff, if I had to use a PC for work, that would be fine. But just like Cliff, when I would get home, I would not touch the PC. That's the reality. And it's not a bash. It's not a shot. I'm just saying, from the perspective of a user not wanting to deal with all of, I just feel, I guess the way to sum it up for the people who are on the fence, a Mac is something you turn on and use immediately. You don't have to fight with the operating system. You don't have to deal with your screen reader suddenly stop working and having to fire up Narrator to see if Windows is still on or not. Because obviously, as a blind person, if you lose speech or you lose Braille, you have no idea if the computer went or if it was just your screen reader. I spend more time sometimes fussing with Windows and JAWS when I'm teaching people and working with people than I certainly do compared to working with a Mac client. I'm not saying that it's always a smooth and, it's not always a smooth and perfectly paved road. I mean, technology is technology. When it works, it's wonderful. When it doesn't, it's not. But I'm just saying, by way of an honest comparison over almost 14 years of training people and using a Mac for 18 years, I just think it's a much better and a much more comforting, I guess, operating system. If you can if you can say a computer is comforting, but in terms of getting what you need done, to me, the Mac is the way to go.
Yeah, to piggyback off of that, I think that there are two things that I would say. Number one, I agree with you 100%. Is that I have no desire to bash Windows or to anything like that. That's pointless, and it's not fruitful. It's not kind. There's no benefit to that. If someone likes Windows, that's fine. I mean, we jokingly pick on them, but that it's fine. You do what you got to do. It's your choice, right? What I would say are two things. Number one, we have the right to have a preference. This is a free capitalist society where you are allowed to make choices about things, and I do prefer and I do choose Apple, and there are a lot of reasons. And again, that's not a Windows bashing session. It's just that I believe fundamentally that I prefer the way that Apple does things. A lot of the things that Apple gets criticized for, by the way, I actually prefer. And I think if people approach them with an open mind, they'd see how they're beneficial to the customer. But that's perhaps a discussion for another time or later on in this session. But, the second part of what I'd say beyond that is one of the things that really concerns me is not the idea of trying to bash Windows, but rather the idea to make sure that what's being said about Apple is actually truth. I like to believe that I'm relentlessly devoted to the truth about these things, and you hear so many false narratives and so many rumors about what Apple products, whether it be iPhone and iPad or Mac, what they can't do, or this problem, or that Apple doesn't. And we can get into all these, of course, as time permits.
And that's worth a discussion, honestly, Matt, because that to me drives me crazy. The myths and people. It's almost like because the Apple ecosystem, that's evil. You can't, you're going to be a cultist, or your mind's going to be wiped or whatever, controlled or whatever. and it's like, come on, seriously, I just don't get that, and I just find it very ironically, I can't even say amusing. I think in a way it's disgusting in certain ways. And again, I'm not taking shots at anybody. I'm just giving you my observation, having been a blind person living in this world and being involved in the blindness industry for over 30 years. When you have a blindness organization that passes resolutions that bashes Apple and criticizes Apple for not following up with accessibility, and totally ignoring the fact that all the other companies such as Google, Amazon, etc., are in the same boat to a greatest extent, that to me is just that is insulting, and that really to me reveals the underlying problem when it comes to the blindness world, is that there is still this protect your own mentality that certain people in the blindness industry still have to hold on to what territory they own, instead of looking at it as what is beneficial overall to advance a blind person's ability to get hired for a job or to get through school.
Yeah. I mean, we still see on a regular basis, more often than I would like to admit, we see comments in some way related to how people believe Apple doesn't care about us, or people believe that this operating system, whether it's iOS or Mac OS or whatever, is just riddled with bugs that Apple is not addressing, or that it's incapable of such and such a thing. Or there'll be comments about, well, if you are serious about the workforce and so on, you'll use Microsoft Word, not Apple Pages. And these are just false. I mean, there's no other way to put it. That's not being critical of anybody. That's not it. It's just factually, they are provably false.
I can tell you from personal experience, and I was very blessed and fortunate that I got to be contracted directly by Apple for about 9 months in 2014 into 2015, in which I was hired to do two things. Number one, train staff, and number two, be part of what was called quality assurance for Apple.com. And this is back in the day when the iPhone 6, the Plus models were coming out. The Apple Watch, at that time, there was a brand new Mac Pro that was being released, and I got to see the marketing material and stuff well before anybody else did. In fact, I was told and I was ordered to keep my screen curtain on at all times when I was working on my Mac, so that nobody could see what I was checking out. And I can tell you, because I was involved in developer meetings, I was accessibility, quote unquote, I was part of the team. And I have worked with people who work for Microsoft. And one of the major things that I've taken away from my experience, accessibility in Apple is involved in all levels of the development process. When they have development meetings for software and hardware, accessibility people are there. It is not like Microsoft, at least as far as I'm aware, unless it's changed in the last 2 or so years. Microsoft had going back to Ballmer, when he was the CEO, everything was compartmentalized in Microsoft. Everything was kept secret from one another because, stuff would get out there so fast. And, but even when Windows and such was in betas, you already had hackers figuring out how to, set up ransomware and stuff. So Ballmer's solution at the time was compartmentalizing all of the developers so there was no real contact, and accessibility, was the last to know, so to speak. And again, it may have changed. I haven't spoken to anybody who works for Microsoft and accessibility for a couple of years, but I was told off the record by two different people that that's the way it was handled, which was the exact opposite of my experience in Apple. And I know, and I'm just going to say, I know people inside accessibility. I'm not going to get naming names and all that garbage. But I can tell you, accessibility matters to the company. There is a voiceover team that is very dedicated and they listen. It's just that there's Mac, there's iPhones, there's iPads, there's watches. There's a lot of stuff that this team has to balance. And, with the progression of operating systems on a yearly basis, it does cause, coding issues and conflicts. And they are there. And don't think that, they're ignoring us. And I'm sick and tired of reading those articles by people who think they know and they don't.
Well, it's fundamentally, and I actually had this discussion the other day on a list. I think because Apple has an accessibility team that is so reachable and so welcoming and so open with us, I mean, to the extent that, that they can be, I think that it becomes very easy to get in the mindset of, okay, these engineers exist solely to design this based on what I say. And if I say, as a blind person, I like it this way and not that way, or I'm having this issue, that they're immediately going to hear that they're immediately going to make it a priority, and that they're going to drop everything else to make it the way that I want it. And of course, when you present it that way, when I actually say that, most people would immediately, no, of course not, because you realize that's not in keeping with reality.
But that's the way some blind people think, unfortunately, Matt. Yeah. And I'm not criticizing, but if you frequent all of the blindness email lists, people love to personalize their problems. And I can point out such stark examples on lists. I remember when they changed the way Spotlight search worked in Mac OS, and somebody got on an email list on this rant about how disgraceful it was because they can't do a Spotlight search the way it used to be done. And somebody gently said, you realize you're one of how many blind people out there? And they shut up after that. Yeah,
it's true. And there just aren't, and a lot of it does come down to that. It's that, we're resistant to change. We see something and we don't like it this way, but nobody asked you the first time either. You know what I mean? Like there was this big discussion about when, and this is what's so interesting about it. And it should prove to people that Apple really does care, even when it's almost bordering on the ridiculous, right? So iOS 17 was released and we got new alert sounds. And right away, the community started, they should give us a choice. We should be allowed to go back to the old alert. Okay, when did you ever get consulted about the first alert tone? When were you ever asked what you thought the first alert tone should sound like? And because you weren't, it's probably not reasonable to expect that you're going to be consulted about the next one. But you just happen to like the first one better. That's your right, personal preference to that. That's fine. But Apple doesn't have to give you the change. But here's the interesting thing. Then 17.1 or 0.2, I don't remember, comes along and they actually do give us the choice.
Yes.
So it's flabbergasting to me. I can think of zero. And that's a bit maybe overly bold, and then people say, you shouldn't say that, but I can think of zero serious bugs in iOS 17. When I say serious, I mean bugs that completely prevent you from doing something, without any kind of workaround.
Agreed,
I can think of zero. And you'd be able to speak and Cliff to Sonoma of Mac OS better than I can, because I'm, mostly an iPhone guy, but I'm sure it's probably pretty close to that too.
Yeah, and here's the reality, and I try to point this out to people, and I know some people don't want to listen because they have this mentality about the way computers and software should work. But when you think about it, regardless of whether you're talking about Microsoft Windows or whether you're talking about, Mac OS from Apple, you're talking about millions and millions of lines of code that are being
That's right.
worked on by thousands of people simultaneously. There's going to be bugs. There is no such thing as perfection when you're dealing with computers. And then you add the arena of screen reader usage onto that. You have another part of the pizza, so to speak, another slice of the pie.
That's exactly right.
You're never going to get perfection. And if you think that you're going to turn on your Mac or your PC or whatever, and you're going to have no problems as a blind person, you're living in a fantasy world. It doesn't work that way.
Right. And the good part about it as Apple users is that they do address them as quickly as they can when they truly make their way up the chain of command, and they can do this. I mean, they have, deadlines and goals and all these things, but they do address the bugs as soon as they possibly can. And look, I don't want to sound insensitive. I've been on the other end of that. I've been in a situation where something I really do. I mean, praise God, it hasn't happened in a while now. 16 and 17 have been amazing, even 15. But I've been in earlier iOS versions or Mac OS versions where there's been some bug that really has prevented me from doing something that I do every day. And yeah, I mean, of course you want it fixed. You want it fixed yesterday. If somebody offered you a plane ticket and said, I'll take you to Cupertino and you can tell Tim Cook directly so he knows about this. Yeah, I mean, obviously, but that's just not how it works. And we have to understand that nobody's doing this to you or failing to do it on purpose. When it's possible to address, it's going to be addressed because they really do care.
Remember the home button controversy when Apple announced they were going, to the 10 models that didn't have a home button. And oh my God, did you see the list traffic about people? Apple doesn't care. They're screwing the blind and all this other, declarative statements that were just absolutely ridiculous.
Right. And I made the statement then and there when that started happening. I said, look, by this point, because that was iPhone 10, I started with iPhone 3GS and really a little before that with the Mac, actually, in Leopard. I made the statement then. I said, you know what? I don't have answers for you. I don't know how we're going to do this, but here's the one thing that I know. I have learned not to question whether it will be accessible. When it is released, there will be a way for us to do this, and we will be able to do it. Because, when you first started with Apple, you maybe didn't know their philosophies, and you would question, is this going to work with VoiceOver? Is this going to have VoiceOver? And I remember an interview where Tim Cook, of course, the CEO of Apple, for those who might not realize who we're talking about, he was interviewed about I think it was the Apple Watch. And somebody asked him if it would have the accessibility features that the iPhone and the Mac had regarding VoiceOver and some of these other features, and they confronted him about that. And his response, I think, spoke volumes because yes, he answered the question and he said that it would, but he kind of answered it. And it's been so long, I don't remember, to quote him. But the paraphrase of it, the gist of it was, why would we not include that? Like, that's part of everything we do. Of course it's going to be there, and that was the last time I ever asked. Well, once I heard that response, that's the last time I even questioned it.
I think it's a sad reflection because, as I said, it kind of goes back to the, as I said earlier, the people who defend their own, that Apple is going to continue to get cheap shotted by people. And, and I remember that article that came out from, I don't know if it was Apple Viz or whatever. I didn't even read most of it because I just don't, I think that for all, obviously, the good that the internet does, I think there's examples of people who use that as a forum to air their own grievances and try to pretend as though those grievances are the universal stand on their position.
Right.
And it makes people feel bigger than they really truly are. And that's why I didn't, on my email list, I shut that topic down because I didn't want it to become it was just a person's opinion, and that's that. I wrote a response which was basically talking about opinions. And a few people who run other lists wrote to me privately and asked me if they could paraphrase what I said on their lists. So, I was kind of flattered by that, but that was my point, is that, in this world, and you can take it out of the context of blindness to anything. Opinions are worthless when you really get down to it, because everybody's got an opinion. What did Clint Eastwood say? Everybody's got an opinion, and, they're like a certain part of the body. Everybody's got them, but some of them stink. And that's the truth. And, that's what happens. And now the internet allows it as a vehicle for people who just want to gripe or whatever. And let's face it, there's still, in this day and age, the paid shills. The people who deliberately go out there and spread, the old expression FUD, fear, doubt, and, I forget what FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And that's what they spread. And, and you're still seeing it. And I remember when VoiceOver first came out on the Mac, and people were writing these articles. And I remember one guy wrote this thing for, I think it was AFB. It's been so long, but he was declaring that there was no spell checker on the Mac, and there was no way to customize VoiceOver, and just a bunch of nonsense to scare people off. And I don't think in 18 years, it's changed a lot. Believe me, the Mac is a lot more accepted in more states than people probably realize, and by certain counselors. But still, you have this segment of the population amongst the blind that have their own personal interests in mind. I'm not going to name names, but there's somebody out there who has been tied. He's worked for Freedom Scientific. He's written stuff for them, who is very good about bashing the Apple constantly, especially the Mac, on his podcasts and stuff. And people always use him as like to go to me privately and say, "Oh, so-and-so said this." And I'm like, really? So I said this. What's the difference? It's our opinions.
Right.
Does it make mine better than his, or his better than mine? No.
Right.
We all have we're entitled. At least in this country, you're entitled to your opinion still. So.
Right. And I would just prefer that the opinion be based on truth and fact. Now, you're entitled.
One of the things, just to jump in here, one of the things that I noticed, and you tell me too, John, because you work with PCs, Mac doesn't, but you work with PCs. Every time a JAWS update comes out, isn't it funny how they put stuff in that VoiceOver already has?
Yes.
Because with JAWS users, because I'm on a JAWS list, because again, I have to use a PC for work, so I have to, stay updated with what is going on and what updates are being done. But it cracks me up that they get excited about stuff that JAWS is about to get in the update that we've had for years.
Yeah, and are there things in JAWS that maybe Apple should borrow? Yeah, absolutely, because JAWS has been around for 30 some odd years. But in the grand scheme of things, at least in my, again, opinion, I don't want to see VoiceOver become this behemoth, cumbersome mass that is going to be difficult for a user to be taught and to learn. Keep it screen reader. Just give us access to the computer. Give us things that we can do to make our accessibility experience work. I don't need all the bells and whistles that JAWS has necessarily.
We don't need all the bells and whistles that JAWS has, but I need the bells and whistles that VoiceOver has. Because, for instance, at work, there's a channel that I have to work where people send in photos. Well, guess what? JAWS doesn't describe photos, but guess who does? VoiceOver. So, either put that in JAWS or give me a Mac. I have requested a Mac at work, and they denied it, talking about you do just fine, your workflow is good, so we're just going to stick with the PC. Well, if these pictures become a thing where it's more consistent, I can't always reach out to somebody via Slack and say, what does this picture look like? And why do I have to? When there's a screen reader out there that will describe to me what this picture is, and I don't have to reach out to nobody and wait and sit and let my numbers go down because I have to wait for somebody else to tell me what the picture is when there's a screen reader out there that does it. So that's just, me. Maybe I'm being picky, but at the same time, if one screen reader can do something, the other one should be able to. I don't know what, infrastructure they would have to modify to do that, but it's isn't that what OCR is basically with text? I mean, they can't do the same thing with pictures?
Yeah, I mean, JAWS has the OC. I always get that like waved in my face about that VoiceOver doesn't have the, the OCR on demand thing that JAWS has. Well, let me tell you something from personal experience, at least for me, I've tried it with several different image PDFs and stuff. I would say 50% of the time, it just hangs. It doesn't work. So if you're going to have an OCR on demand on the Mac, let's just make sure it works.
OCR, basically? I mean,
it's pretty much, yeah. It goes into a virtual window and stuff, but it hangs. Like I've done PDFs that I easily, converted using DocuScan or Abby Fine Reader on the Mac, and I used the OCR on demand on JAWS, and all I got was the
quiet.
As it counted down it kept showing me 5% completed.
So
I come back a half hour later, it's still 5% completed.
Yeah. But the other side of the coin is PDFs on Apple, whether it's Mac or iPad, iPhone, if they're image-based PDFs, more often than not, you can get them to read.
Yes.
You can use screen recognition, you can use image recognition, text recognition, and, is it a perfect system? No. There have been times that it has misread something or that it hasn't, but more often than not, it's going to give me what I need.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, like we've all said, this is not a Windows bashing session. This is not a Mac versus Windows, JAWS versus VoiceOver. This is basically letting you know what each system has, what it has to offer, and what may meet your needs. But this is, like I said, this is the preview of the More with the Mac course that I got coming up. And if you are a Windows user and you're listening to this podcast, come and check it out. If it's not for you, then don't get a Mac. Now, I do understand that Macs are a little more expensive, but the prices are coming down, and you can get a good used refurbished one. And when Apple refurbishes something, it's basically brand new. So, I mean, you can get them for good prices.
Weigh that versus SMAs. Even if you're an NVDA user, okay, that's fine. But if you're a JAWS user, weigh the price of a Mac and what you have to pay for JAWS and all the frustration and stuff. Now, don't get me wrong. I want to be clear about this. Vispero's tech support, Freedom Scientific, they are awesome people. I've dealt with them. I've had clients deal with them. So in no way, shape, or form am I criticizing the dedication and the abilities of the people inside that company. They are really, really good folks. But, like I said, you're still dealing with Windows when the day is done.
Yeah. And that's just, even going beyond the accessibility. I mean, it almost seems like we shouldn't even have to talk about this in 2024, but, just the fact that the Windows platform essentially needs a lot of protection, antivirus and so on. And people don't realize, because Apple doesn't make a big deal of it, that stuff is present on the Mac. It's built in. That is happening behind the scenes. People say, well, Mac doesn't have any antivirus. Well,
it does.
Not right. Yeah, it's not in the classically in the way that you think of an antivirus, but it is there, and they really don't need anything else to supplement that. So you're not spending extra money on those subscriptions or worrying about the maintenance of that.
System integrity protection.
Exactly.
The requirement of code signing and notarization on apps. These are little things that Apple does behind the scenes
that nobody gives them credit.
Nobody really, most people, unless you're a geek like me, understands how it works.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been trying to get you to train me to be a geek like you, but you just been slacking.
I can't let you in on all the secrets now.
Yeah, but to summarize, this is, like I said, more with the Mac. If it's not for you, keep your Windows, keep your Linux, whatever you use. But we're not trying to force you. We're not trying to tell you this is a free course. And, we're basically just going to be teaching you the basics from the ground up. Matt will, go over the interactive stuff because he's way better at that than me, and I'm not reinventing that wheel, and nor do I like to talk as much as he does. And the other thing is, I will teach you some other stuff, but the bottom line is, if you want if you want more intuitive stuff, check out Mac for the Blind's podcast and the YouTube page, because he's already done stuff this year, and I'm not reteaching that. I'm teaching stuff or gonna go over stuff that he hasn't gone over. And I think, one of his was free, the other 3 are paid, reasonably priced. What is it, John? $10 or $20 for that?
Something like that, yeah. Yeah.
So,
and even if we cross over in what we cover, you're still getting it from 2 different perspectives.
Exactly.
I firmly and truly try to encourage people to get their information and their learning from more than one person, because people have a different way of teaching things, and people sometimes, what I cover and what I touch on may be completely different. I might miss something that Cliff hits me with. He's done it to me on my Zoom calls once in a while, where he mentioned something to me, and I'm like, oh, holy crap, I forgot about that.
So, any final thoughts on this topic anyway, Matt?
No, I'm in agreement with all of it. I think John has done a fantastic job, and we're all on the same team, and I think what we've got is going to be a blessing to you also. Check it out, and I think you will be very, very, if you have an open mind going into this, I think you'll be very thrilled with the possibilities. I guess the last thing I would say on this subject is just to touch on something very specific. A lot of people ask right away, and we sort of alluded to this earlier, but a lot of people ask if they can use, Microsoft Office and so forth on the Mac, which absolutely you can do. But I in this course, more with the Mac, we teach Pages. We're going to be doing some more extensive stuff on Pages later on in this year too, right, Cliff? And yes. I think that's worth a look. That's worth spending some time.
And I think that's where, I said we're wrapping it up, but I just want to mention one queer thing, because I don't think either one of you mentioned it. John, wouldn't you agree that Windows users that are coming over to the Mac or are considering the Mac, their biggest hesitation or the reason they stay on one side of the fence more than the other is because they're scared that Pages won't do what Word can do, or that it's going to be too much of a learning curve, that Pages won't work or function or give them the access that Word does. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that there's a myth, and I think it's purposely sort of distorted. They make Pages sound like it's this completely different species from an extraterrestrial or something coming to Earth. And it's not. It's a word processor, and it's just you do things a little bit differently, but when the day's done, you're still doing the same things that Word does.
Right. And I have to admit, I'm a little biased to the Mac because I've been using it for 13 years. And to me, it like you said, John, you're not going to remember everything in a day. It took me 6 months to at least get comfortable with saying, I know what I'm doing, but I'm 13 years in and I'm still learning new stuff every day. Nobody knows it all. Nobody. Nope. Not even the engineers at Apple.
No.
Thanks for joining today's session. Didn't get your question answered? Want paid one-on-one training? Email us at support@ttjtech.biz or support@stiritup.com. And remember, stir is spelled with a U. That's STURITUP.com. I'm Trainer Cliff. Thanks for joining us. God bless. See you next time.